Thank you, Madam President. I would really like to thank you for the task you gave me a year ago. We didn't expect it would take a year, actually. I remember the first conversation I had by phone with your head of cabinet. He said, well, what do you think about February? That was September. So I said, well, no. And also I had to think for a few days, if you remember, before actually saying yes to your extraordinary kind offer, because the task seemed to be so daunting, so difficult. And now we are a year later, and the report is here. But it's here, really, let me say one thing. It's here because lots of people have worked on that. And in a sense, my debt of gratitude to them goes way beyond the words that I can say now. There was such a, I would say, dedication, attention, desire, and awareness that the situation, as I will say in a moment, is really worrisome. And let me thank first and foremost the Commission team and the commissioners and the senior management of the Commission for their support all throughout the journey. But there are also lots of other people outside the Commission that I have to thank. People who come from the academic community, from the corporate world, from the social partners, the European Parliament, member states. And I should say that from each and every one of these conversations, I learned a lot. And when they say that the experience is in the journey, that is exactly what I lived through, and I'm really thankful to you for this. Let me now say a few words as a way of introduction to our conversation. Now, we have said many times that growth has been slowing down for a long time in Europe. But we've ignored it. Until 2 years ago, we would never have such a conversation as the one we're having today, because things were sort of going well. We were doing well out of globalization. Unemployment was steadily falling. But now we cannot ignore it any longer. Now conditions have changed. World trade is slowing. China is actually slowing very much, but it's become much less open to us, and actually it's competing with us in global markets on all accounts. We've lost our main supplier of cheap energy, Russia, and now we have to start for our defense again for the first time since the Second World War. At the same time, this is the first year when Europe cannot count on population growth for its increase. And population is set to decline steadily, so much that by 2040, there will be 2 million workers disappearing from the labor market every year. So now more than ever, we have to lean on productivity, but productivity is weak, it's very weak. So if we were to maintain our current average productivity of the last 10 years, say, it would only be enough to keep GDP constant until 2050. But we have, with this slowing growth, low productivity, our needs are actually rising. And they are rising because we have set a series of ambitions that we think are very important. Decarbonization, digitalization, strengthening our defense, and first and foremost, and I made sure that this was clear since the beginning of this report, we want to preserve our social model. But the investment needs that all this entails are massive. The investment share will have to rise by around 5 percentage points of GDP to levels last seen in the 60s and the 70s. I always like to make a comparison. The additional investment provided by the Marshall Plan between 48 and 51 amounted to 2% of GDP. But why do we care so much about all this? That's one question I asked. Why do we care so much about growing? Yes, we have to finance these needs, and these needs are important. But why are they so important? Well, they are important because they have to do with our founding values. Europe is a land, a continent where our values, the European Union values, are prosperity, equity, freedom, peace, and democracy in a sustainable world. And the EU exists to ensure the Europeans that they actually will benefit from these fundamental rights. And if Europe can no longer provide them to its people, it will have lost its reason for being. And the values that I mentioned before, like climate and growth, are intimately related to our founding values. That's why what we are trying to do now becomes existential itself. And that's why we care so much. And that's why the report will argue for what I defined in a speech, a radical change, which will have to be urgent and concrete. I would say I was thinking this morning about which two words would capture the essence of this report, is urgency and concreteness. This report presents a new industrial strategy for Europe based around three main areas for action. By the way, this report is granular. It's concrete, as I said, it's granular. It contains around 170 sort of proposals. If we only look at the general proposals, then there will be sub-proposals of different kinds. Let me also reassure you, we are not starting from zero. That's why we have hope, a founded hope of being able to do what this report argues for. We have strong education, we have a healthcare system that works. As I said, we have good welfare system, and then we have lots of specific strengths, talent, and here I come to the very first driving line of this report. Namely, we want to aim at closing the innovation gap with the United States. Innovation is the first pillar of the report. Europe is nowadays stuck in a static industrial structure populated by mid-technology companies which are already mature. The leading firms in research and investment spending are the same ones we had 20 years ago. Autos, cars. In the United States, it used to be the same. Autos and pharma 20 years ago, but now it's all digital at the top. The problem is not that we lack smart people, and we don't lack certainly good ideas, but there are too many barriers to commercializing innovations and scaling them up in the European Union. Just let me give you one number. Since 2008, close to 30% of the so-called unicorns, namely companies that will go to be valued more than 1 billion euros, unicorns that had started in the European Union have left, and the majority of them went to the United States. So 30% of our most successful innovators have moved. And this has to change. Europe must become a place where innovation flourishes, especially for digital tech. And a weak tech sector, we should be aware of that, will not only rob us of the growth opportunities of the coming AI revolution, will also hinder innovation in our traditional sectors, so that will hamper their competitiveness. The second area is what the President mentioned before, and it's combining decarbonization with competitiveness. Namely, let me give you the bottom line of this. We want decarbonization to be a source of growth. If all policies are in sync with our climate goals, and as we will see later in our conversation, it's a big if. Decarbonization will be an opportunity for growth. But if we fail to coordinate, there is a risk that decarbonization could run contrary to competitiveness and growth. We have an opportunity to lower our energy prices. Let me just say that once we look deeply at our energy market, we see a market that's been still designed for at a time where natural gas and fossil fuels were the most important component of the energy mix. Now it's not so any longer. Natural gas in 2022, even though being roughly 20% of the energy mix, set the price 60% of the times. It's a market that, thanks to long-term contracts, but also other things, it's really dominated, I think, by vested interests. It's a market that is also burdened by financial rents. And it's a market that's become a cash cow for national budgets, for member states' budgets. Taxation on energy is one of the highest in the world, if not the highest. So all this bottoms down to the fact that we are not able to transfer the benefits of less costly energy produced by the renewables to our consumers, both households and industry. So we have to have in place a plan that first and foremost aims at decoupling the price of fossil fuel energy from clean energy sources so that end users see the benefits of decarbonization in their bills. But there's also another side to this consistency in our climate policy, and that is providing the clean technologies to enable decarbonization. You know, what we have to do is really to increase the supply of clean energy. And to do that, we not only have to, as we've done through regulation and standards, look at consumption, demand, but also we have to increase supply. To some extent, that's what IRA is doing. In the United States, there are many standards or many prohibitions. What is there? It's just a lot of incentives for increasing production. Also, our clean tech industry now faces a competition with China. And certainly China could offer the cheapest route to meeting the EU's climate targets. But China's state-sponsored competition represents a threat to developing our productive clean industries. That's why we want decarbonization to become a source of growth. We have to look at all these sides. It's very important for our planet, but also to be important as a source of growth, we need a joint plan spanning industries that produce energy and those that enable decarbonization, such as clean tech and automotives. The third area of this report is increasing security and reducing dependencies. As the era of geopolitical stability fades, we have matured two basic sets of dependencies. One are the economic dependencies. The raw materials we use in all our productions are in the hands of a few suppliers. And then we have security dependencies, given that the geopolitics has considerably worsened in the last 10 years. So all we have to develop is a foreign economic policy here, coordinating preferential trade agreements and direct investments with resource-rich countries, building up stockpiles in selected critical areas, and creating industrial partnerships to secure the supply chain for key technologies.